Back to 4 for 4's the most accurate podcast, and happy Cinco de Mayo to everyone celebrating out there. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today by friend in life, John Paulsen. And John, I know you are head first deep right now into projections post NFL draft for everyone.
Yes, I'm in the rankings cave, as I call it, and peeking my head out to join you for an hour worth of fantasy talk about the draft. Looking forward to it.
We are hoping it's an hour because it is a jam-packed show. And with the top 10 developments, top 5 winners, top 5 losers, however you want to phrase it, these, I think, are the top 10 most important takeaways for fantasy that's important from the draft. And I want to start with my first winner. And you saw these. You did not get to tell me to cancel them if you do not believe so, which is why I'm very excited to get your points on these, because my first winner is the future wide receiver market. And there are a lot of steps to unravel with this one. And it's because, let's start with A.J. Brown, for instance, because the Titans offense now, following the A.J. Brown trade, what we know is that a league high 67% of targets were vacated from last year. I updated it Saturday morning once the trade went down, plus 22 targets, another league high inside the 10-yard line, all missing from last year. And when you look up and down this roster, Robert Woods, coming off of November's torn ACL, is legitimately the only option, I believe, that might threaten Treylon Burks for the leading target share from Ryan Tannehill.
Yeah, I think this is the story, or one of the stories coming out of the draft is how these targets in Tennessee are going to be divvied up, how the targets in Philly, are going to be divvied up. Treylon Burks seems like he's going to have a floor of about 120 targets. It's hard to maybe 110, 120 targets. Just looking at the situation with Robert Woods, his knee injury, when is he going to be back? If he's back for camp, then this will get really interesting, because I think there's some questions about Burks being completely pro ready and ready for this sort of role. But if Woods, he being Woods, is not 100%, or is iffy going into camp, then it just looks like Burks is going to be the wide receiver one from the get-go, and that means a big role. I think the other guy that sort of is flying under the radar is Austin Hooper. He had two really good seasons in Atlanta before signing that big deal in Cleveland, and then was sort of part of a committee there, for no real good reason, I guess. But now he's landed in Tennessee, where they really need him this year. Like they need some, solid pass catchers, because the depth chart after Woods, after Burks, is pretty thin there in Tennessee.
Of course, the player they shipped out, A.J. Brown, now in the Eagles offense. And before we discuss how A.J. Brown fares from Jalen Hurts in that offense, I quickly want to step back and just analyze the Eagles draft, because on the surface, they only made 5 picks. But when you take a big picture view of their draft class, it's really those first 3 players they added with high capital in rounds 1, 2, and 3, Jordan Davis, Cam Jurgens, and Nakobe Dean. And then you have to factor in that A.J. Brown is basically a part of this draft class. Also, a 2023 first and 2024 second pick that they basically got from that pick swap before the draft from New Orleans, which makes it really, at the end, a master class from Howie Roseman on how to consistently get the most out of your draft capital. But we now know that A.J. Brown will be playing alongside Devonta Smith with Jalen Hurts. So how do you see this offense, a run-heavy one nonetheless, shaking out?
Yeah, I would say certainly Jalen Hurts is one of the quote-unquote winners out of this draft, even though he didn't really get any skill players added as rookies. I mean, we got A.J. Brown now. He's got like one of the best receiving cores in the league. A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert. Quez Watkins is a pretty good third receiver probably for them. Jalen Reagor, it seems like they're trying to give up on, or they may be giving up on. But I mean, from 1 through 3 plus the tight end, that's a pretty strong group, and they've got some pass catching running backs as well. So Hurts is really set up for success this year. And I haven't looked at his ADP yet, but if he's sort of going in that mid QB1 to low end QB1 range, he's going to be a nice value there.
Where do you put AJ Brown? I don't know if you've gotten to this in your rankings behind the scene just yet, but where do you fit AJ Brown? Because when I look at this offense, for me, it's pretty simple. In the fact that Devontae Smith last year was already frustrating enough as the wide receiver 43 in fantasy points per game. And I don't think he can excel further since we now have a superior talent we expect to lead the team in targets around him, right? Like, I don't think he goes forward because of AJ Brown. And so for me, it always comes back to, well, if I think this offense can only support one wide receiver alongside Dallas Goedert, it's going to very clearly be AJ Brown if he falls into the right ADP.
Yes, and I think you're right. AJ Brown is better than Devonta Smith. It doesn't mean that Devonta Smith can't take a second year leap forward in terms of his skill and his ability. But in order for this offense to support 2 good receivers plus Dallas Goedert, if you're looking at 3 primary fantasy pass catchers, Jalen Hurts really has to take a step forward and grow the pie, the passing pie. It can't be this kind of run heavy offense that we saw last year. It's not going to support that many players. So I think you're exactly right on that. This trade is not good necessarily for Devonta Smith. I mean, it'd be better for him if it was just him and Goddard as the 2 primary options. So, looking just to this year, I mean, you like Devonta Smith, like long-term, he's a good player and I think he's got a bright future, but this is taking, eating his lunch money a little bit, unless Hurts is really able to maybe increase that passing pie by 10 or 20%. Then there's a chance. As far as AJ Brown, he only had 105 targets last year, 106 the year before. He's been, kind of dinged up both seasons. Has finished, he's a touchdown maker. He went over 1,000 yards twice, but really hasn't put together a full 17 game season since his rookie year. And I think going from Ryan Tannehill to Jalen Hurts is a little bit of downgrade in the quality of his targets. And unless they could get on the same page right away, which I think I saw a picture of them at Disneyland, so that's a good sign. But you think this is a little bit of a downgrade for AJ Brown as well because he doesn't have that rapport built in with Hurts.
They are best friends, and other best friends as winners in the wide receiver market, the future wide receiver market, is also Marquise Brown, because it's genuinely the perfect fit. This is why they are rumored to trade up for Jameson Williams, the Cardinals were, because they needed this exact type of player. Kyler Murray, of course, completed a league-high 49% of his passes, 20-plus yards downfield last year, and Brown commanded a team-high in air yards from Baltimore the past 2 seasons. Brown, of course, 24 years old, also under contract for only $7.75 million over the next 2 seasons, which is great considering the current wide receiver market. And so overall, I think it's a tremendous win for Marquise Brown. So how do you see this offense shaking out, including the 6 games that DeAndre Hopkins is now expected to miss?
Yeah, and Kyler Murray and Marquise Brown know each other well from their days in college, and this is shaping up. Not only just Brown moving to Arizona and now playing, being happy and playing with one of his old teammates, but now Hopkins is sitting out for the first 6 weeks, and there isn't a ton of competition there for him. They want to get Rondale more targets, but he's more of a line of scrimmage type guy, where that's not Marquise Brown's game at all. He's more of a deep intermediate to deep threat. So I guess it's AJ Green is he still on the roster? I think they re-signed him for a year.
They did re-sign him, yes.
So he's probably his primary competition right now early in the season. When Hopkins comes back, things will get a little dicey. You got Zach Ertz at tight end, who's probably a 5 to 6 target per game player, and if Hopkins comes back to his usual 9 to 10 targets, then things might get pinched a little bit for Brown, but he might have already established himself as a pretty clear option for Kyler Murray by that point. He's going to be the number 1 receiver for the first 6 weeks, so that's probably not going to go away just because Hopkins comes back.
We should also remember that Zach Ertz averaged 8.3 targets in the 8 games he played without Hopkins last year, compared to 4.5 in the 4 starts he made when the 2 overlapped. I know they added Trey McBride in the second round, but also remember, before Kyle Pitts, rookie tight ends, we know we can completely gloss over in fantasy. They just don't make an impact because there's too much to learn at the next level. Trey McBride is not someone who gets in the way of Zach Ertz, at least in year 1. Year 2, next offseason, let's have this conversation again. But until then, take the ADP dip, in my opinion, on Zach Ertz. But with the Ravens and trading Marquise Brown, that also means we need to sift through Baltimore's offense and the leftovers pieces, because with their draft, what I think is happening, John, is that they're telling us that Lamar Jackson's career high 32 pass attempts per game from last year, 5 more than his previous career high, was a fluke. That's not supposed to be the plan. That was just happenstance, I believe, after multiple starting running backs went down prior to week 1, followed by both trenches crumbling due to the injuries on defense, and then them having to hinge on backups in their secondary, which naturally forced an uptick in negative game scripts and passing volume. That's not what they want. And they showed us that with their first 4 picks, 2 being on defense, including number 14 overall pick, the number 1 safety by numerous front offices in this class, Kyle Hamilton, also adding center Tyler Linderbaum at the end of the first round. And with all that plethora of 4th round selections they made, 2 tight ends in the 4th round as well, which is pretty respectable capital to start day 3. And so overall, when I'm sifting through the Ravens passing attack, I do think we should be high on Rashad Bateman for probable target volume. But overall, I just keep going back to the idea that they don't want last year to ever happen again with Lamar Jackson.
I mean, if you look back at what he did in 2019 and 2020, 401 pass attempts in 15 games in 2019, 376 pass attempts in 15 games in 2020. I think that's what they want. But I mean, he had 36 touchdowns and 26 passing touchdowns in those 2 seasons. So this can still be a pretty healthy passing attack. It just needs to be more efficient and lower volume. I think you're right, though. They're probably going to get back to sub 30 pass attempts per game. They went well above that last year, and it was sort of out of desperation due to the lack of running attack. But they got Dobbins back. They got Gus Edwards back, so they're in pretty good shape as to run the ball. I think you're looking at Rashad Bateman, though, and Mark Andrews with this Marquise Brown move. They both look pretty safe to me, even though it's going to be low volume. The offense is going to go through Bateman and Andrews. So I think they're both pretty good picks this year.
Another winner, I believe, from the draft is Josh Allen's completion rate, because remember how they responded to 2 high safeties, which basically made their Bills offense below league average for the first 11 or 12 games heading into the playoffs. They then said, screw this. We're going to give Devin Singletary 17 carries per game over his last 6 starts, even though Devin Singletary is really just an analogy of they needed a running game, and he's the one who was there for them. They purposely schemed Josh Allen for an increased 9 scrambles per game because, again, they needed a way to attack underneath. Now enter James Cook, who never had more than 12 carries in a single game in college. We're not expecting him to do that at all. But more importantly, registered just a single drop on 74 career targets as a matchup-based option Georgia used to throw out there in one-on-one situations against opposing linebackers because he has the 40 speed to beat them. And so I think that's what is going to help Josh Allen, is that now they can still keep the ball in his hands and allowing him another option to pass to underneath.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just Cook. I mean, Cook's an obvious beneficiary. This is the role that they were trying to give J.D. McKissick until he decided to go back to Washington. And clearly they weren't happy. I mean, just all their actions here have indicated that they weren't happy with Singletary's pass catching. This isn't an indictment necessarily of Singletary on first and second down. It's just they want more juice out of their running backs as a receiver. And Zach Moss is okay at it. They brought in Duke Johnson, who's pretty good at it. But it's probably going to be James Cook there on third downs. And then I think, the other way that they're looking to attack underneath, they did lose Cole Beasley, but they re-upped Isaiah McKenzie, who was great in that one game where Beasley was out. I think he had double-digit catches. They also signed Jamison Crowder, and then they got Khalil Shakir in the 5th round. So these are some other ways, along with O.J. Howard in free agency. these are some other ways to attack underneath if that's what they're going for, which it does seem like they are.
Just in an effective way to move the ball. Also, as someone who's been dabbling now, especially an underdog with best ball million opening up, 2 million to the top, 1 million to second place, absolutely insane and fun. I'm still very high as well, higher than consensus on Stefon Diggs, apparently. And if you allow me the soapbox really quick, I just want to say that, remember, in 2020, he was a mid-fifth round pick ahead of his first season with Josh Allen, and he responded with leading the league in targets, catches, and receiving yards as the wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game. And he did so without any downfield production, right? Just 9% of the targets were earned 20-plus yards downfield. But fast forward to last year, when everyone was improperly drafting him too high, even though we knew regression was coming. And what happened? Of course, he regressed in overall scoring, but the volume surprisingly was still there. 9.7 targets per game. His explosive downfield rate, 20-plus yards deep, jumped from that 9% rate to 17%, and he led the entire league with 22 end zone targets. But finished as the wide receiver 10 in fantasy points per game. And now all of a sudden, everyone's pushing him down to wide receiver 7 to 9 somewhere, when really, like, in my opinion, he should be in the same tier as Devontae Adams, because we're not drafting last year's stats. We should now be banking on the fact that he did get that volume and didn't score according to that volume. And so I do think it translates over, and I want to be higher on the field than Stefon Diggs.
Where is he going right now? Like what position?
He's the wide receiver 7 or 9. He's going sometimes. So honestly, I haven't even had a chance to see. His ADP is at the first round turn typically. I am usually drafting him. This is probably, it's too early in the offseason for a hot take, but I've been drafting him over Devontae Adams right now.
I think that's reasonable. And I think the other player that we haven't talked about yet with the Bills, and he's been a hot topic, is Gabriel Davis. I think he's a good pick as well. I have to look at these ADPs. I'm not at that point yet in the offseason, but there's just a ton of talent in this offense. And you can say, well, you know, one of these guys is going to miss out. And I think it's probably going to be this competition at the slot, you know, McKenzie, Crowder, Shakir. I don't think it's going to be Diggs missing out. I think Knox has, you know, showed last year that he's a tight end 1 fantasy wise. He's always been a real good athlete and kind of put it together last season. And then, you know, the running backs are probably going to be divvying up a smaller pie, and Singletary doesn't look as appealing, but I think Diggs, Davis are going to be solid. They're going to continue to attack outside, even though they want to work the middle and work underneath a little bit more to deal with what the defenses were doing last year. I don't know where Davis is going. I think he feels to me like he's a 7th, 8th rounder and a pretty solid pick there.
He is around that range because, like Albert O, he's the one player everyone's on top of. Like, remember the last time we saw Gabriel Davis play, he had over 200 yards receiving in prime time. Like, that doesn't fly under the radar for anyone in fantasy. So yeah, Underdog's pretty on top of him. Moving on, though, another winner, I believe, from the draft is Dallas's pass play rate. Because in my opinion, no team plummeted more in available talent in their roster this offseason than the Cowboys, who think they can replace Randy Gregory, for instance, with Dorrance Armstrong full-time, stick a 21-year-old developing Tyler Smith at left guard without missing a beat, I guess, in place of Connor Williams, and then move on from Amari Cooper and Cedric Wilson with a recovering Michael Gallup, who we're not even sure if he's going to be ready for week 1 just yet, and some machination of James Washington and Jalen Tolbert, who I do like. Not to mention, remember, this defense also led the league in turnovers last year, and that's like the least sticky stat possible that doesn't translate from year to year. And all of that tells me that we need to be higher on their passing game, because they will have no choice inevitably but to throw the ball more, since they are a shell of themselves in a division that basically got better with all other 3 teams in that division.
Yeah, I was wondering where you're going with that, with all the offensive line talk, but you landed where I kind of thought you might, which is that the passing game is pretty strong still. Mm-hmm. They have a very good quarterback. CeeDee Lamb's obviously a top tier type receiver. I think this is really an interesting situation, and it's not just Michael Gallup, but there's quite a few guys that are coming off of ACL tears, and we have to gauge where they're going to be at week 1. And Gallup was injured very late in the year, and there's no guarantee that he's going to be back. So, you know, in time for even September or the first 4 weeks of the season, he might miss more than that. So we just have to sort of monitor these guys and see how far along they are in the progression. But you're looking at that offense, the wide receiver, if Gallup is out, the wide receiver 2 spots wide open. It's either James Washington or Jalen Tolbert, I would think. And I think Tolbert is probably has the inside track. I mean, he's a really good route runner. I was hoping that he might land with the Packers, but didn't. And you look at James Washington. He had his moments in Pittsburgh, but then they just drafted Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson, and then he just sort of fell to the wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 spot there in Pittsburgh. So can he get his career back on track? So that, to me, if you're looking at some value at the end of drafts, or I don't know where Tolbert's going to end up going, but Washington's not going to be drafted very high. Mm-hmm. Watch this Tolbert Washington battle. They might both be playing starting in September in 3 receiver sets. And if they are, then they both could produce. But yeah, I really want to know who is going to survive the return of Michael Gallup and be on the field for 3 receiver sets. And that player is probably going to be a very good value late in drafts.
For immediate return in redraft leagues, not dynasty, but redraft league short term, it really wouldn't be shocking, in my opinion, if Jalen Tolbert outscored a Garrett Wilson this year solely by rookies, because Tolbert genuinely has the better situation. Like, there's arguably no competition there if Michael Gallup is out. And as we mentioned, with a defense we expect to descend this year, they have no choice but to throw the ball more. So that was my initial thought on draft day as well, is that, wow, like, I didn't expect Tolbert, who I like as well, to land at a good spot, but it is actually a really good spot for fantasy purposes.
Yeah. And I think Dalton Schultz is really safe. And I did see that his ADP is really high. I mean, I think he's tight end 5 or something like that right now. So it's not like you're going to get a bargain on him, but he's a very, like, after that top tier tight ends, he's a very safe option there. He's going to see the same amount of targets as he saw last year.
Another winner is the Colts playoff chances, because the immense from Carson Wentz to Matt Ryan, who will now be playing behind the best offensive line of his career, overshadows all the other terrific moves this team made this offseason, and adding Stephon Gilmore to their secondary and adding Yannick Ngakoue to the edge. And as we saw over the weekend, more importantly, finally adding explosiveness and juice to the lineup rather than trotting out T.Y. Hilton for the 3rd consecutive year. Like, Alec Pierce, their day 2 wide receiver, is the perfect complement to Michael Pittman, and that he averaged nearly a 17-yard depth of target for his career at Cincinnati, translating, like, that's, he literally deadlifts 675 pounds and translated that to the field with a 41-inch vertical at 6'3", 211 and 92nd percentile broad jump, which, as we know, that is a drill at the combine that translates to explosiveness. And then take their 3rd round tight end they added in Jelani Woods, who at 6'7", 269 is literally the most athletic tight end to test at the combine ever in the history of the combine occurring. And so all this gets back to me, and I think this is the best team in the AFC South. Like, and I think it spells a massive year for Michael Pittman.
Yeah, I think this draft went really well for Pittman. Not only the draft, but obviously getting Matt Ryan in is an upgrade over what he was enjoying. And I use the word enjoying loosely last year from Carson Wentz. And you just look at their depth chart. It's going to be a lot of Pittman. Pierce is, I think, a good addition. He's I actually played basketball, AAU basketball, with his uncle back in Wisconsin, which is a weird connection. And he's, as you mentioned, super athletic, more of a deep threat right now. Maybe he can develop a little bit more as a route runner and become a full face type receiver. But it's going to be a lot of Pittman, and it's going to be a lot of Matt Ryan to Michael Pittman. The tight end situation is kind of, you mentioned Jelani Woods. I think he's pretty raw. And we also can't trust rookie tight ends. So I think you're probably looking at Mo Cox as sort of a sleeper at the tight end position this year. They do have Kylan Granson as well, who's sort of a receiving tight end there that played some for them last year. But just not a lot of target hogs in this offense right now. So I think Pittman is a very safe, wide receiver 2 type that, probably will be, available probably into the 4th round. I would have to think he's not going earlier than that. And then, Nyheim Hines will catch some passes. Paris Campbell, if he's healthy, if he can stay healthy, yes. There's just not a ton of competition for Pittman. And even Pierce coming in is probably a nice compliment for him, because he's going to clear out a lot of space for Pittman to work.
Pittman also a big Mount Harmon guy, correct? Grades out well in reception perception.
Yeah, Pittman is one of his favorites. So and that gives me confidence. You're looking at these players, and you're sort of wondering if these second, third year players are good. I love seeing reading Matt's charting and looking at the data and seeing where they fall, because if they're due for a bigger role, or if they're an ascending player and they score really well in his charting, then I feel pretty confident ranking them pretty high.
And last but not least, my final winner is probably one that confused you. It is two-headed backfields. And that's because the same discussions, Paulsen, that are happening right now are literally the discussions we've had for at least the last 3 years. Probably goes beyond that. But just think about when Carlos Hyde sat in front of Nick Chubb whenever Chubb was drafted. Whenever Marlon Mack was supposedly in the way of Jonathan Taylor's workhorse role. Like, there's so many other examples I could point to whenever a talented running back lands in a situation where it's basically only one other person, where everyone tries to sift through the backfield and analyze it, and they just end up overanalyzing it, because the point at the end of the day is just bet on talent. And right now with Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker, I think you can buy ADP dips in redraft leagues and best ball and bet on talent. Even if it's the other one, Rashad Penny, for instance, or Michael Carter that comes through, we're going to have more than enough opportunities to get both. I think you just buy in to whatever the ADP suggests we do. And again, bet on talent.
Yeah, I suppose it's, bet on talent's easy to say if you don't, but it depends on who you think is the talent. I think Breece Hall's, I think Breece Hall is, I think they're declaring. I mean, Michael Carter did pretty well last year when he had the opportunity, but I don't think the Jets view him, or scouts view him as good as Breece Hall. So, but I think Carter's good enough that he's going to be a thorn in Breece Hall's side. I don't think this is a situation where you're waiting for Hall to beat out Carter as a starter. I think he's probably going to be the starter. It's just how much work is Carter going to have? That's the question. So if it's a 60-40, that's not as good as if it's 70-30 or an 80-20, like we're hoping for some of these stud running backs from like a Jonathan Taylor situation, where we were just waiting for that sort of workload to happen. And once it happened, he was going to be in the RB1 top 5 type ranks. This Jets offense is still, trying to find its footing, and they did add some receiving talent, but I don't know that this is that Hall is going to be like this, guy who's going to break out as a rookie. I think this is
Before you talk about Kenneth Walker, sorry to cut you off. It just sucks so much because I keep coming back to this Jets roster too, and it's a great roster, honestly, especially now you get Matt Gardner to like play a role they didn't even need, but can help Saleh's defense so much. It's just the issue. It keeps coming back to the same two questions, right? It is Mekhi Becton going to be there in week 1? And is Zach Wilson going to develop? So no matter how much talent we see, and they literally, like the Broncos the last couple of years, where they had all the talent around them, they just needed a quarterback. It literally just comes back to Wilson and how he develops in year 1. That's what's frustrating, as I'm sure you ran into over the weekend, trying to parse through Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore. Like, how do all these players get there? They can't.
Yeah, I'm at the point in my projections process where I've got the team projections done. I do a top-down analysis, and then I start divvying this stuff up, and I'm not at the divvying up point. And that's the problem, is that you're looking at these backfields and you're like, well, how's this going to shake out? Breece Hall specifically will very likely lead that backfield in touches if he's healthy. But how much of a role does Carter have? And I think the same question can be posed with Rashad Penny, who he finished the season on fire last year, and they brought him back, I think, on a 1-year deal. Didn't commit a ton of money to him or anything, but it looked like he was going to come in. Maybe Chris Carson would be there as well. But now with this Kenneth Walker pick, you're wondering how, is Carson's health even a factor? Is he going to be a factor this year, Chris Carson? But it's Penny and Walker, so how does this shake out? And I look at what Penny did late last year, and I'm thinking, well, he's got to come in as the de facto starter, but that doesn't mean that he holds a job for the year. And the way that the Seattle team is run, I mean, they try to be run heavy, and this offense now is going to be pretty ugly, it looks like, given the quarterback situation. I mean, Drew Lock, they have 2 good receivers to throw to, and a good tight end with Noah Fant. But I mean, I don't know that Drew Lock is the answer. Geno Smith apparently is in the running to start, and then they've been linked to Baker Mayfield as well. And I do think that Baker Mayfield would probably be the best option for this entire offense. Doesn't make him a great option, but it would be the best option. So I just don't know how many touchdowns they're going to score. I don't know how many rushing touchdowns they're going to get. I don't know how many carries inside the 10 they're going to get. This is just a different animal now with Russell Wilson out of the way. And then you're looking at Penny versus Walker specifically, and there's not a clear winner in talent, given the way that Penny finished. I mean, he showed a lot last year, but can he stay healthy is the big question with Rashad Penny.
And we know why they ended up drafting Kenneth Walker, because they saw Rashad Penny in him. Like Jonathan Taylor and Penny, it was Walker who also got the most yards after contact per carry, 4.5, for a running back with 250 plus carries in a season. Like, they profiled them as the same explosive runners. But as you mentioned, whenever Geno Smith, who is reportedly in the lead in this competition, I guess is what we call it right now, before they make a potentially Baker Mayfield deal, like, what does that offense really turn out to be? Is there enough room for 2 explosive running backs? Because how often will you be in a position to even run the ball? So that's what I keep coming back to. That's why I worry. That's why I still struggle to pull that button on Underdog on both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Because at the end of the day, like, who survives? How do we even get there with this offense?
Yeah, this might be one of these. I mean, you look at their win total, it just, everything is pointing to just a bad season for the Seahawks. And I think this offense is going to struggle unless they make an upgrade at quarterback, or if somebody like Drew Lock or Geno Smith can somehow provide like mid-level quarterback play, like NFL mid-level play. I don't see it. Like, this looks like a bottom 5, bottom 3 quarterback situation, and that's going to affect the entire offense.
The Seahawks are actually the perfect segue to take a break and come back with our top 5 disappointments post-draft. Stay tuned. Right now, if you sign up at Underdog as a new subscriber, not only will you receive a free pro subscription to 4for4 with access to all of our off-season content, including our around-the-clock Discord conversations, Underdog will also match your deposit up to $100 by 100%. Literally mirror it. And there are no catches. Just download the Underdog app, use the promo code 4for4 when depositing. That's the number 4, word, the number again, and presto. Reminder before we move on, it is a new era here at the Most Accurate Podcast. We are bringing you consistently 2 episodes per week, every Monday night and Thursday morning. So make sure to rate, review, and subscribe, because that goes a long way in helping us and knowing exactly what you like, because that's what we want to hear. Anyways, though, let's continue on with our top 5 biggest disappointments from the post-draft. And for me, it starts with the Chiefs' watchability, because everything this team has done this season, whether it be adding a between-the-tackles grinder like Ronald Jones, prioritizing defenders at the top of the first round with Trent McDuffie and George Karlaftis over making their first wide receiver selection, or essentially trying to replace Tyreek Hill with Sky Moore. And I do think Sky Moore can actually develop into a threat at every level. But with the evidence we have from his collegiate performance, led the nation in yards on slant routes last year and accrued 85% of his career targets within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. That all tells me the Chiefs are doubling down on that same boring offense that allowed Patrick Mahomes to lead the league in passing yards after the catch last year as a response to 2 high safeties over the second half of the season, which also allowed the Chiefs to win 9 of their last 10 regular season games. So it's no surprise they're going back to that. Except this year, Paulsen, they are projected to face the league's toughest schedule of opposing defenses, including their 3 random pools of out-of-division games being the Bengals, Bills, and Bucks. So the Chiefs are facing uphill already. How do you see this wide receiver corps, which a ton of different guys thrown in there? How do you see it shaking out?
Well, I think that they gave a lot of money to Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and he got more guaranteed than Juju Smith-Schuster, I believe. And I think Smith-Schuster is probably the safest option in terms of other than Travis Kelce, who did get a bump up with Tyreek Hill being traded. I think Juju's probably going to be second in line for targets, and then MVS is probably third. And then, Moore will be competing with Mecole Hardman, Josh Gordon, Justin Ross, those types of guys. But I think Moore is the best player. I think he's already better than Mecole Hardman, who hasn't shown much progress. He's been okay, but we've been keep waiting for this Hardman to turn into Tyreek Hill, and he's not going to turn into Tyreek Hill. It's like waiting to make, trying to make fetch happen. Fetch isn't going to be, it's not going to happen.
There is someone out there like pumping their fist right now behind the podcast.
So I think MVS is actually the sleeper here because I believe his ADP is third in this receiving core behind Moore and certainly behind Smith-Schuster and behind Moore. And I think he's probably the guy who is most likely to make a huge play. Now he showed it in Green Bay that it wasn't consistent, but there was just times where he and Rodgers weren't on the same page. But he was running 6 yards behind the defense, and Rodgers misses him by 3 yards. And I just feel like he's better than what people are giving him credit for in terms of the progress that he made, year 2, 3, 4. So I think he's a really nice fit in this offense. If what you're trying to do is you can't replace Tyreek Hill with one player. So they realize that, and they're trying to do it multiple ways. Valdez-Scantling can replace the deep threat, and maybe they're trying to use Moore and Juju Smith-Schuster to replace some of the shorter stuff. But I think, if you're just looking at value right now, Valdez-Scantling is going to be a full-time player. He's got 4.3 something speed at 6'4", and I think he's a very nice match for Mahomes when they do decide to throw deep.
Do you think, though, he's someone who could average 6 to 8 targets per game, since that's not the type of player he was in Green Bay? Like, do you think not only will they use him more like that, but can he be used like that? Because it's a rhetorical question, right? Like, I genuinely don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with MVS in Green Bay was that he was playing alongside Davante Adams, and there just wasn't enough targets there for anyone to come in and average 6 to 8 targets consistently. So basically, with Green Bay, it was Rodgers is looking at Davante Adams first at every drop back, basically, unless there's a place, specifically designed for Robert Tonyan or Lazard or something, which is very rarely. And then after that, it's like, okay, who's open? And it might be Lazard for this one game, or it might be Cobb for this other game, or it might be MVS is getting open deep, 4 or 5 times. It just wasn't they were always giving him a deep shot or two. It just wasn't a consistent, as you mentioned, threat. But I think if you look at this roster and this receiving core compared to Green Bay, there's nobody here that is a Davante Adams. I mean, you could say Travis Kelce is. He's going to see a lot of targets, but it's possible that Valdez-Scantling could pressure Smith-Schuster, and those two could be pretty close in targets. It depends on how much he develops within the scope of this offense. I just think that Valdez-Scantling, from a value standpoint, is the standout right now. Like, we're actually talking about, like, is he going to be the number one receiver in this offense? Probably not. I think there's a chance that he leads in receiving yards after Kelce. He's probably not going to outcatch Smith-Schuster if Smith-Schuster stays healthy. But he brings an aspect that Smith-Schuster just doesn't, and that's the deep threat. So, I'm looking forward to seeing the offseason reports, and is he shining in practice? Are they connecting him and Mahomes? Do they show a nice rapport? Because I think that'll go a long way, to get him to that 6. Averaging 6 targets a game for him would be pretty big, because he's going to have so many air yards in each of those targets.
I'm also glad you chose to mention his profile historically with Aaron Rodgers, because today is the day I chose to die, and bringing Aaron Rodgers' weekly ceiling to the table as a potential loser post-draft. Not only because they traded Davante Adams pre-draft and prioritized defense with their 2 picks in the first round this year, but I'm also genuinely concerned about Christian Watson, who didn't play a single game out of 52 against FBS competition, finished with a career 30% contested catch rate at 6'4", and Romeo Doubs, who I was actually looking through Dane Brugler's post-draft grades in The Athletic, and mentioned that he even thinks Doubs could get beat out by 7th-round addition Samari Toure. And so I'm actually concerned about their skill set, Doubs and Watson's, like, translating so quickly into year 1 in the NFL, and perhaps needing too much development for Aaron Rodgers, who turns 39 in December and probably just doesn't have the patience for these type of players right now. Also, this build, all of this tells me that they're probably going to lean on a more run-heavy approach and try to play great defense. And to me, that could lead to fewer, I should say, QB1 performances, which is huge since he spiked 10 of 16 last year and does not offer the rushing volume that could perhaps get him there this upcoming year. What do you think about, like, Aaron Rodgers' outlook this season?
Well, I don't know off the top of my head where he finished the last 2 seasons, but I think he was top 3 fantasy, top 4 fantasy for the year.
He was
Um,
6th in fantasy points per game against the 9th easiest passing schedule last year.
okay,
Because
so
remember, for whatever reason, when he broke his toe, he became an even better player. Still not sure how that happened, but he was unstoppable.
well, he tends to overcome adversity. He was
Yeah.
was QB5 last year, and then the year before, just double checking that he was QB2. I think yes, if you lose Devontae Adams, arguably the best receiver in football, it's a setback for him. I'm very interested. It has to be looked at within context of where his ADP falls within his position. So I've heard I watched listened to the Yahoo Fantasy podcast the other day, and they were all down on Rodgers. I believe they all had Derek Carr ahead of him. That he might be in the QB 10 to 15 range for them. Like, to me, that seems a little pessimistic in terms of what he's going to be able to do. It's just that, he's a really good player. He's back-to-back MVP. Is he going to completely fall off a cliff because they lost Devontae Adams? You look at the 8 games where he played without Devontae Adams, and he actually averaged more fantasy points, 21.2, than he did with Devontae Adams, 20.7, since the 2016 season. So he's capable of still producing at a very high level without Devontae Adams. I just think we're going to have a different offense where he's spreading the ball around and making all his reads and doing more than just throw the ball to Devontae when, even if he's covered, because he knew that if he threw it to Devontae, he'd be in the right place. He's not going to get the ball intercepted, and Devontae's going to have a pretty good chance to catch the ball. But now it's going to be, okay, who's open? 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you brought up the rookies, and he does not have a history of working well with rookies. That doesn't mean that he can't or that he won't have to. This is a situation where if he doesn't throw the ball to Christian Watson, then it's going to be Allen Lazard, Randall Cobb, Amari Rodgers, who he barely threw to last year, and Robert Tonyan as the top 4 options. Maybe Sammy Watkins is an option there if he can stay healthy and stays on the roster, frankly. But I think he's gonna have to figure it out with Watson, and I think there's a lot of potential with Watson. I'm maybe a little bit more bullish on his year 1 with Rodgers. I know there are big questions about his level of competition, North Dakota State, but he did very well at the Senior Bowl. I believe the secondary there voted him the receiver of the week, and he. I saw multiple scouts talking about him dominating those practices, and I watched some film of the practices, and he looks fine to me against NFL level competition. So I'm a little more bullish on that. Matt Harmon did see some problems with his route running, but he also had some good routes that he ran well. And one of the ones he didn't particularly run well was the 9. And I think with his speed, that's going to work itself out. 4.3 something at 6'4". He'll figure that out, I think. So I'm a little more bullish. I don't know where I'm going to end up having him, but this is going to be more of a spread it around offense. I don't think that any of these receivers are going to go over 1,000 yards necessarily. You're probably looking at a bunch of guys with 600 to 800 yards. But I think that Rodgers and Matt LaFleur are going to figure it out, and he's going to continue to produce at a QB1 level. He's done it in the past without Adams, and I think he'll be able to do it this year.
So let's say you have a couple glasses of wine, like both of us tend to do from time to time, and you dive into Underdog and you draft Aaron Rodgers because you suddenly get even more bullish on him. How do you rank your stacking options for anyone listening right now who may have Aaron Rodgers?
That's a good question.
Because they're all, like you mentioned, they're all up for grabs except for Aaron Jones, but the receivers, you could really prioritize them if you want to and get them late.
Yeah, I think the safest player is Lazard. He just still an ascending player, fairly young, has his trust. I don't know that you're going to want to, go out and chase Randall Cobb at his age,
right?
With Amari Rodgers sort of nipping at his heels. I think Watson would be a good if you really want to take some chances and bet on him having a good year. And Tonyan is dirt cheap at tight end, and this was a good draft for him. They didn't get a tight end early or anything. Like they were mocked to have Trey McBride as possibly an addition, and he didn't arrive. So I think I would probably prioritize them that way. Probably Lazard, Tunyon, and Watson in that order, because Watson probably will be. Well, I don't know. I'm interested to see if Lazard or Watson ends up being drafted first. Probably Lazard, but I'm not sure. So I'm interested to see how that kind of shakes out. I'd probably take the second of those two, whoever's still on the board, and then Tunyon.
Even for as bearish as I am on Watson, I do think he's a good late round best ball option, because if he does develop like the player we think he can, I think he's a better splash player individual. And that will leave headaches in redraft, but be just fine in best ball, where you can just allow the scoring to dictate when he starts. So I am totally fine with stacking him in best ball with Aaron Rodgers if you get there. Another losing option from the draft, though, and this goes without saying, is the Patriots backfield, because as we know, James White averaged 6.5 targets, 14 fantasy points in the only 2 games he started with Mac Jones last year prior to injury. Damian Harris led the team with 14 carries inside the 5. Ramondre Stevenson spelled Harris over the second half of the season, when both practically became unstartable options because they just cannibalized one another. And now we had Pierre Strong with respectable capital on day 3, because he offers explosiveness that none of the others do, and having 76 of his 267 career carries in college gain 15 plus yards. So what are your thoughts? Maybe not just even on this backfield and how to approach them, but also with the Patriots offense. They did add Tyquan Thornton in the second round, who is getting knocked for the draft capital they used. And I think that's appropriate response, but also like Kadarius Toney last year. I understand it's not first round capital, but like Kadarius Toney, he did show talent in college, Thornton did, and is high draft capital essentially. So like he's falling to the end of rookie drafts when I think he's a very good pick as like a later option.
Are you suggesting that he's a good pick for this year or
No.
for Dynasty?
Dynasty.
For Dynasty.
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel sort of the same way. They have a lot of experienced receivers there, and I don't think that the Patriots have much of a reputation for just throwing rookies into the fire unless they absolutely have to. So Jacoby Myers is decent. Devontae Parker is really good with a contested catch ball. He gives them some size in the red zone. Kendrick Bourne, I believe, led the team in yards per route run. Highly efficient player on the targets that he got. And Nelson Aguilar is sort of playing that role that I think they want Thornton to kind of get into, the deep ball role. So it's an ugly receiving core. It's going to be very difficult to project week to week. These guys are going to rotate a lot because they do have a lot of veterans, and if they do want to get Thornton involved, it's going to get even uglier. I think at the running back position is where the headaches really get. Like, we were expecting a headache at receiver, right? But we weren't necessarily expecting a headache at running back as much as we're going to see. I mean, Damian Harris was RB13 last year in half PPR. I think he was headed towards another pretty good season. Probably still is, but Stevenson maybe nipping at his heels. James White, Pierre Strong, as you mentioned. It looks like we're getting back to the Patriots rotation, and maybe they find roles that they like for each one of these guys, and they all play. I'm a little less bullish on Harris, and he was like, you like him in standard formats. He's going to score a lot of touchdowns, but you can't count on him to have that floor that you want, or that receiving floor that you want. And with Stevenson there sort of nipping at his heels, it makes it a little bit dicey. So I think I think we're back to the Patriots running game being kind of a headache.
And remember, Damian Harris, RB13, as you mentioned, with double-digit touchdowns. Like,
Yes.
Think about the hoops he has to climb in order to get there again. So that's what makes it so tough. And everyone usually, like in the offseason, a lot of people think like, oh, well, like one of these backs will play so well, they grow into a 3-down role. But as we know, we have 2 decades literally of experience underneath Bill Belichick where that doesn't happen. Your weakness does not touch that field. Only your strength plays on that field. Otherwise, you get taken off. That's it. And so there is no hope for Damian Harris like emerging as a pass catching option, especially if we expect James White to come back. James White will be my pick, a la James Cook, in the later rounds of best ball drafts where you go 0 RB, because I think the receptions will help us get there. But overall, that's kind of where it stops for me, especially as you mentioned, the voidable contracts the Patriots really have after this year, because like Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne probably won't be on the roster after this year, quite honestly. Some more. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add that Hunter Henry is probably the safest player. If you just like who plays a position that you could actually get starter numbers out of him, it's probably going to be Hunter Henry. He did emerge over Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith didn't play well. They basically stopped throwing to him, and Henry emerged as that number one tight end for them. And I think he's probably in line for another tight end one season.
And even then, remember, he had 9 touchdowns on 50 catches. Like and that was from week 5 on. Like he didn't score in the first month of the season. So he went just on a torrential, unsustainable tear, which is what I keep coming back to when I almost click the button. I'm like, can he do that again? But also they have no one else that could do that. So maybe he can do that again. Another loser from post-draft was all those Falcons receivers that thought they were going to be the number one from Marcus Mariota, because I'm sure Olamide Zaccheaus, Auden Tate, Damiere Byrd, Frank Darby all called their parents afterwards before the draft thinking, now's my chance, Mom. And nope, Drake London, number 8 overall, going to step in as the team's number 1 wide receiver. Is this as easy as Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Cordell Patterson?
It looks like it. Those other guys are going to get something. There's going to be a rotation there at wide receiver 2, 3, 4. But this whole offense appears like it's going to go through Pitts and London, and they both should see 110, 120 plus targets fairly easily. And then if Patterson is used the way he was early last year, then he's going to be a value. Like it seems like he's slipping in drafts too. Like I think drafters are looking at what happened to him late last year and thinking that's going to translate to this year. But they just cut Mike Davis. They did draft Algier. So he's sort of a Mike Davis replacement, I would think. Damian Williams is there. I believe he came over in free agency. He's a pretty versatile back, but sort of a journeyman at this point. I think the interesting question is Drake London with Marcus Mariota or Treylon Burks with Ryan Tannehill. I mean, they're probably going to see similar target shares and total targets, but which player is going to end up with more fantasy points? I think Tannehill's the better passer, but Mariota might be capable and bounce back and give us, a career resurgence and really deliver the ball, or London and Pitts in decent manner. They're gonna be moving the ball, dinking and dunking, I think, down the field. So that's sort of like, I'm wondering who's going to see the most targets between those two. Those two likely going to lead. They look like right now, the jumping off the page is rookies that could see 120 plus targets fairly easily.
And you asked the question. I think I still lean Treylon Burks because, in my opinion, his targets will be easier to catch. Whereas Drake London was awesome last year at USC, but as we talked about on our live recap, 11 catches per game, 15 targets per game. I don't think that translates over that workload so much. I think it's still going to be a lot of deep targets from Marcus Mariota, where at least we get accurate targets underneath. If the Titans use Treylon Burks as such for shallow crossing routes, as they did for AJ Brown. And I do think that's why, whether I believe it's right or wrong, and I think they're wrong on it, but I think they think wide receivers are expendable in their offense because they could have other athletic guys run crossing routes. They never jammed AJ Brown targets. They never schemed for AJ Brown. They made him depend on his own athleticism, which is what I think they see in Treylon Burks as well. So I bet they use him similarly. Having said that, he does have the athleticism to seed with those easy targets. So that's where I kind of fall with Treylon Burks right now. Someone asked me that question over the weekend, and I do think he's the number 1 redraft receiver right now.
Interesting, because I think the consensus is, and I don't think it's a solid consensus, but I think the consensus is that Drake London is in the best situation, even though his quarterback situation isn't great.
It's a fun argument to have because they're both fun and talented wide receivers.
The other thing is Robert Woods. So we don't know where if he's back, that changes the equation a little bit. And
also they traded for Robert Woods, yes, to excel in the passing game, but also he's like PFF's highest graded run blocking wide receiver.
Run blocker, yeah.
They know what he does best, which is why they traded for him, which is interesting. And finally, last loser of the weekend post-draft, the belief that New Orleans understood how to use their draft capital. I'm going to tee it up to you to speak on Chris Olave in a positive manner. I'll do the dunking and allow my mentions to burn from Saints fans, because before the draft even started, Mickey Loomis traded next year's first pick and 2024 second rounder to get another first round pick this year, which left them with 16 and 19 on Thursday night. But the Saints then moved pick number 16 and a third and fourth round pick to move up to 11. Jump 5 spots with Washington for Chris Olave, which I don't think should be rewarded, no matter what I think of Olave, because that entails too much hubris and overconfidence to not only project wide receivers to the next level, but Ohio State wide receivers, which we always know have been the most impossible to project translating from college. But with that team building out of the way now, I would like to get your thoughts on Chris Olave, another Matt Harmon guy, since it's apparently a prerequisite that we mention him every single rookie.
Yeah, I mean, Matt Harmon's research just really helps inform like where these guys are. I don't watch a lot of college football, so I'm not sitting there judging these receivers based on my film work or sitting on the couch on Saturdays watching them play. So having somebody who is used to looking at receivers and judging them, and then usually being pretty accurate. Like I think he had one miss last year, and that was Terrace Marshall. He rated really well, and who just didn't have a very good rookie year. Doesn't mean he's not going to eventually succeed, but Olave was the best separator, and by a wide margin, he said, in this year's class. So I put a lot of stock into that, and I think we just talked about Burks and we just talked about London, and I think Olave is sort of the dark horse to perhaps lead this rookie class in receiving, and it sort of depends on what happens with Michael Thomas and what they want to do with Jameis Winston at quarterback. Are they going to make him a 20 to 25 pass attempt game manager, or are they going to utilize his skills a little bit more as a passer and allow him to throw the ball 30 to 40 times a game? I think that those are questions that remain to be answered. But Olave's got the talent. I love the idea of him playing in the dome. I think he's going to be a very tough cover. I think there's a chance that we end up with like a Marvin Harrison in playing in Indy with Peyton Manning, and he was impossible to cover indoors. So Olave is going to be ranked fairly high, I believe, projected fairly high, given the nature of this receiving core and how much they spent to move up to get him, which you look at as a negative because of what they did from a real world standpoint. But from my standpoint, fantasy, I don't care as much as I'm reading into it. Like, oh, they really like him and they really want to use him. And it appears that he's in line for this number 2 receiving role at least. So where does Michael Thomas fit into all this after a year off? He's good enough to come back and be the number 1 receiver and number 1 target in this offense. But where is he at mentally? How does he feel about the organization, et cetera? And where is he at physically? And then at tight end, they've got they don't have they had Troutman, Jawan Johnson at tight end. There's no, and then Alvin Kamara is the wild card here because he's got some legal issues. And if he's suspended, that's another 6 to 8 targets that are up for grabs, and they're not all going to go to the backup running backs. So there's a lot of moving parts here. I mean, I like the landing spot. I think he's landed with a pretty good quarterback who can support number of fantasy receivers when he's allowed to, and I think Olave has the talent to produce, and especially in this situation indoors. And then given the nature of this receiving depth chart, I mean, Marquez Callaway was okay last year. Traquan Smith's okay, but there's nobody here that really scares me at the 3, 4, 5 spot in terms of infringing on his playing time.
That note on Olave being able to separate the next level with ease, I think is the most important one to keep in mind, because when you read guys like Dane Brugler, Lance Zierlein, they even said at 187 pounds, that was going to be his major question mark at the next level, was using that 4.39 speed. And if he could use that to then separate over the top. But if we believe he can, that's tremendous since he did produce in college. Justin, thinking about the immense amount of talent to ever walk through Ohio State. Not only that, but the talent he played around as well, even as much as Jameson Williams in 2019, right? And then to think that Olave was the one out of all those guys to leave with a program high 35 touchdowns and lead Ohio State in receiving touchdowns in 3 consecutive years. It wasn't a 1-year fluke, right? He did it every single year he was there. Like, that's super impressive. If you can tell me then also he's able to separate and get yards that way at the next level. I like that note a lot. But with that wraps up the top 10 developments post-draft for us. What do you have on the site for everyone at 4for4.com coming out?
I've just got my 15 Impact Rookies article that's up, and then hopefully next week, I'll have the first iteration of the 2022 projections for everybody. This is like the busiest time of my spring, is getting post-draft to getting those projections out. So it was nice to come out of the rankings cave and talk to you for an hour. But that's the next thing on my docket is next week. Those projections will be released possibly early the following week.
Also, while you were in the rankings cave, I will tell everyone that TJ Hernandez has all of his best ball guides out on the site to read right now while you are digging into the Best Ball Million 3 tournament. Also, tons of player profiles from Jennifer Eakins, Chris Allen, so many people doing great work behind the scenes. And next week, as you mentioned, very big because you are shooting for your first run of projections and rankings. I will have my best ball tiers on the site, as well as we have a lot of other things to exploit default ADP on the site as well. So tons of things coming out in the next couple of weeks in particular. Stay tuned. Until then, we'll be back this time next Thursday. See you then.